Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. So today we are starting this new series led by Maritza on the greatest ideas of Buckminster Fuller. And we are starting slow because we want to get what the greatest ideas of Buckminster Fuller are. And most of us, including me, we're just starting out. So how do we begin? How do we begin to explore greatest ideas of Buckminster Fuller? The first solution that we had was to choose a book, and we chose Critical Path and went through it. We're planning to go through it. But then as we started going through the book, I talked to Maritza, and we realized that it's much better to kind of focus on key ideas and proceed that way. So that's the route that we have chosen. So today, the idea that we are going to be looking at is ephemeralization. But before we get there, there was something really surprising that happened this Sunday. We had an incredible presentation by Curt McNamara, and he used a map during the presentation. So I want to show you the map because it's the best summary of Bucky's greatest ideas that I have seen so far. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. And let me go here, right here. Okay. There it is. So this is the map that he came up with. Now, this is the result of a discussion in this Trim Tab book group on September 12th, 2022, and I'm sure Curt has worked on it further. So what I want to do is I want to zoom in. This is a mind map. I want to zoom in and look at the mind map at this first level. So he talks about Bucky's core teachings. And there are 5 categories here: systems, system change, power of the individual, power of design, and shape of nature. So I want to get our feet wet in the ideas of Buckminster Fuller. Many of us have read some things by him. We've been listening to a whole bunch of speakers on Bucky's ideas. So hopefully some of these ideas will speak to some of us, and we will go from there. Now, the question is, in what order should we go through this? Now, realize that my understanding of Bucky's ideas is very poor. So I'm just trying my best to organize these things and go through these things as best as I can. So on the face of it, it looks like, there is something about nature, shapes of nature. There is something about system and system change. So there is something here. Give me a second here. I'm going to use this. So there is this here. There is this here. There is something about the power of the individual and power of design. So in what order shall we encounter these? Okay, so that's what the question is. Ideally, I would like to start with nature, and Bucky holds that the nature consists of systems. So systems, of course, comes before system change. Then this is power of design. It's about designing of systems. So I would have gone 1, 2, 3, 4, and power of individuals as showing what can individuals do as a result of this. But when I look into this one part, I see that it is far more specific. So I'm going to keep this towards the end for now. So I'm thinking of starting with systems, then go to systems change, then go to the power of design, and then go for power of individuals, and then deal with the shape of nature just as a side point. So that's my plan. So does that make sense? I'm going to ask Maritza here. Maritza, does that make sense? Starting with systems, then system change, then design, power of design, then power of individuals, and then touching on shape of nature.
It kind of does, except we're violating that already today. We're starting with power of design.
How are we starting with power of design? Oh, you mean that point of ephemeralization? Yes, don't worry about that, because the first part of this meetup is going to do this overview, and then we're going to jump into this. And the beautiful thing about this mind map, the reason I like mind maps, is that it shows all the connections, and you can see the entire structure right here. And then you are able, now we are going to be focused today on this part here. Okay, that's going to be our focus in the second part of the meetups. But so let us start with systems. Okay, now we've been talking a little bit about systems. So now I'm going to go ahead and use a fresh one here. So we're looking at systems. All right. So this is a core idea. If you look at Buckminster Fuller's ideas, system is clearly a core idea of his. And even how he looks at design, it's always design of systems. And when he's looking at the power of individuals, he's always looking at our ability to understand systems and to change systems. That's how he looks at the individual. So in that sense, system is a good starting point. All right. So let's just go through the points here. And then what I'm going to do is that BFI, Buckminster Fuller Institute, has a very good piece on systems. So I will bring that up and we can go through that. And then after each of these main sections, I'm going to call on people for comments and adding anything that they want to add. So you can see here, systems have shape, are distinct from universe, more than the parts. So the whole is more than the parts. The concept of synergy, which is a crucial idea. Everything is a system. Tetrahedron is the minimum system. They are multi-scale and multi-frequency. Okay, that's how this one summarizes systems. Now let's look at Buckminster Fuller Institute, big ideas. Let's go to the big ideas section, in which we can go to the systems idea, and let's see what is there in systems. Okay, systems. So let's see, it's a fairly short description here. So let me just go through it as a way of introduction. Buckminster Fuller used his deep understanding of geometry to help us understand systems. Many of the things he taught have entered the mainstream of thinking. His unique approach was that the shape of the systems and their models are essential to understanding the behaviors and the interactions we see in the universe. His main systems teachings include each of us and all that we interact with are systems. Our thoughts are systems. Everything we perceive is a system. Systems have shape and are distinct from their surroundings. All systems have an inside and an outside. This is a huge point. Therefore, systems have a minimum of 4 corners or nodes. These connect to form a tetrahedron. The connectedness between the nodes are known as relations. So connections between the nodes are known as relations and are what hold the system together. A relation may be a flow, a force, or a field. Systems are not closed. At their boundary, every node is linked to its surroundings. Calls it leaky nodes. All system corners, there it is. All system corners are leaky. They either have extra energy or need energy. Systems exhibit synergy. There are comprehensive system behaviors in nature unpredicted by the behaviors of systems components, a phenomena known to scientists as synergy. In this figure, we can see Plato's triad. So this is an example of triad. Symmetry, truth, and beauty only becomes a system when you add the observer. The first step in perceiving systems is to focus on the situation of interest. As you bring your awareness to the challenge, you tune in to appropriate systems. Make sure to zoom out and perceive the larger systems, and zoom in to see relevant systems within the situation. Okay. Okay, I'm going to read this much again. And then I'm going to go back to the diagram of systems. I'm going to list all the points, and I'm going to invite people to talk about any aspect of systems. The system properties and characteristics are due to what Bucky called generalized principles, laws of universe that are true everywhere and at all times. For example, everything we see is a particular configuration of energy material. The form of configuration is due to generalized principles. Every situation is made up of interacting systems. What are the ways that systems interact within and with each other? Each of us is a part of universe. Everything we sense and interact with is distant in time and space from us. Yet we are continually coupling to other systems. This coupling can be very loose, like the atoms of air in a room, or the coupling can be flexible, like molecules of water flowing. At times, we orbit a system, like a political movement or way of making art. Our orbit is stable when the force that attracts is dynamically balanced by the force of flying away. If attraction between two systems is stronger, then one falls into the other. When outward motion is stronger than the attraction, we fly away from each other. This is an example of precession or systems coupling. We find that precession is completely regenerative. One brings out the other. Regenerative one brings out the other. So I gave you the dropping of stone in the water. The wave went out that way, perpendicular to it, and this way beget that way. So this way beget that way, and that way beget that way. And that's why your circular wave emanates. Once you begin to get into precession, you find yourself understanding phenomena that you have seen a stone falling in water all of your life and have never really known why the wave does just what it does. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the diagram here of systems and point out these headings, and then I want to open it up for any comments on systems as the basic unit of the universe. So systems have shape. Systems are distinct from the universe. Systems are more than its parts. Systems have synergy. Everything is a system. Tetrahedron is the minimum system. Systems are multi-scale. Systems are multi-frequency. So I would love any comments that you have on this. Again, I want to thank Curt McNamara for producing this amazing mind map. So please go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you'd like to comment on anything about systems and the role the concept of systems plays in Buckminster Fuller's thought. I'm going to stop sharing so that we can talk to each other. We will start with, give me just a second here. So Ravi, what do you think is the place? So what we are trying to do is that we are now trying to look at the whole of Buckminster Fuller's thought and asking what each of these concepts, what role each of these concepts play in his thought. So Ravi, what do you think is the role of the concept of systems in Buckminster Fuller's thought?
Yeah, I have a background in understanding Yuri Bronfenbrenner's I guess you could say it's an ecological system that graduates throughout I guess you could say the know why and the
Ravi,
epistemic
let me do
knowledge.
one thing. Let me do one thing. What we're trying to do is that we're trying to grok Buckminster Fuller's ideas right now. So let me have everybody talk about Buckminster Fuller's ideas, but please remind me to come back to you towards the end of the meetup where you can bring ideas of this gentleman in. Thank you, Ravi. Next up is Joe.
Yeah, I mean, so Buckminster Fuller essentially uses geometry to help us understand systems in general. He looks at everything as a system in the sense that our thoughts are systems, our perceptions are systems, how we interact are systems, and essentially what are the connections that are between us. So then you start to look at things just a little bit differently. So then he gets into the idea that of the tetrahedron being the minimum system, and then how those connect to one another, and the connection between them and the relationships between them. You can kind of see some of the main concepts in this one category already, and where you start to see this idea where you come to the idea of tuning in. And this is probably in another one of his part of the mind maps, but you see where he talks about frequencies, he's talking about tuning in and drawing boundaries. And we'll get into that. Can you
talk a little bit about what does tuning in mean?
So tuning in is essentially, how do I best say it? It's basically refining exactly what it is that you're trying to do, and to determine the best action to take given a set of constraints or boundaries. So that's what it means by tuning in. So there's this idea that you have circles of boundaries that you've created, and working within those boundaries is tuning in and coming up with something that is relevant and able to be used.
Wonderful.
What else? Systems are not closed, as you had mentioned. That's a very important point, because then you can always push beyond the boundaries as well. That's how new things happen. And that is essentially, we'll get to that point with ephemeralization. That's a very important point when it comes to ephemeralization. that, that's it in a nutshell. I mean, the way I look at it is, more than anything, when I think of Buckminster Fuller defining systems, is that he uses geometry to help explain how systems work together and how boundaries work and how we interact with one another.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is going to be Maritza, followed by Bob. Maritza.
So what I see here when we're talking about systems and the several subcategories listed in the mind map, it's, if we were going to look at it from, just an average person looking here, not being overly familiar with Buckminster Fuller, this is a call to intentionally view one's personal path, the universe path, humanity, society in general. And what we're seeing here and what we'll learn in more detail as we tune in a little more is that this is, this is a concept brought up in most of Bucky's works. If you guys went through with the operating manual for Spaceship Earth, you'll see that he talks about systems, and even though the main driving point is this call to a very systematic approach that is very well focused and approached with intent, it's really an entreaty to all of us. And what he states in the chapter on systems theories in operating manual is, he says, if we are to be effective, we are going to have to think in both the biggest and most minutely incisive ways permitted by intellect and by the information thus far won through experience. So to me, that line there, that's why systems. Why do we care about looking at systems? Because the systems exist. As the example that Shrikant just showed us, the idea of the waves and the fact that there is a very systematic reason for why the waves react in the manner in which they do. These systems already exist. It's not like we're going to discover them. It's just a call for us to be more alert, more mindful, more engaged with life in and around us, because the ultimate goal, obviously, is that, improvement of ourselves, community, humanity. And we're going to see that in every one of these 5 paths that Shrikant shows us. So I just wanted to bring out that level because Joe did such a good job of giving you the actual factual basics. I just wanted to show you there's more layers to it. And this is the more nuanced layers of Bucky that I see for this. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Maritza. Next up is going to be Bob Pan. Bob, what do you think is the role of systems in Buckminster Fuller's thought?
Well, you're asking me a question. I was going to ask you a question. What is the role?
You can ask me a question too.
I'll do
questions
both.
are all good. Both directions.
I think he's trying to cover everything that can be covered in his basic manner that can be covered. But that brings me to the question is, what about situations where you have chaos or unpredictability or randomness? Does he take care of that? I'm wondering.
That's a good question. I mean, what we're trying to do here is that none of us are experts in Buckminster Fuller. So we will be able to answer it maybe a little bit later, a couple of months later for me, or maybe even more. But he does. I think the short answer I can give is that he looks at systems as dynamic, and he looks at systems as interacting with one another. So that's the kind of start of where he's getting at it. I don't know exactly how he does it. There is the entire, so I don't know the interaction between the entire kind of complexity theory, chaos theory, and Buckminster Fuller's geometry. And still, I don't know. So, but thank you. Next up is going to be Becky. Becky, go ahead.
I want to start off with the first bullet point. Each of us and all that we interact with are systems. And then the other one was all systems have an inside and outside. It makes me think of nature's fractal-like characteristic where you can learn something because of that self-similarity by looking inward, but you can also learn something about yourself by looking outward. And to what you had read earlier about the attraction, if we're being pulled too much inward, it collapses. And that can happen when we're so focused on ourselves and we're saying like, forget the world, they're lost if they don't accept me for who I am. That's not how it is. The system is not a closed boundary. It does not have closed boundaries, and but the opposite would be the world defines me, and you're being pulled outward. There's no sense of self, and they're both fragile. That those are both states of fragile systems, but it's that balance that he talks about that keeps that system together, and it's always moving about. It's as he said, it's dynamic. It's like a cybernetic approach of always trying to stay within that balance of a little bit up, a little bit down, but really moving around that boundary. And so I thought that was very interesting in terms of looking at it with self.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Becky. Give me just a second. I'm trying to get you let me see if I can do that. Give me just a second. I'm trying to get you, I'm trying to send you send everybody the image that I have been using. Let me see if I can do that. Not this one. Hold on. Having difficulty with the image here.
Shrikant,
Yeah,
while you do that, can I want to add something to
please go ahead.
So Bob was asking about chaos, and again, I'm fairly new to Buckminster Fuller as well. It's only been a couple years dabbling, but in some of his works, I've seen that he talks about chaos from in perspective of it being a fundamental part of systems. When we get to in the image, when we get to tensegrity, we can maybe throw chaos into that section, because I think that would be a good place to put a pin for further discussions on chaos and its vital role within systems.
Wonderful. All right, folks. So I have put the mind map in the chat, so you can bring it up on your computer and look at it whenever you want to look at it. Oh, just a second. Sorry, I did not send it to everybody. Give me a second here. There, one, here, two, and there it is. Open. Okay, there it is. All right. So I want to try to go through. I really like the description at the BFI website. Okay, so first, So this is what he used. This is the minimum system. Okay, so I'm just going to read through the sentences and try to apply it as best as I can. Again, I'm just getting started, so bear with me. And if you think that I'm making mistakes, please point them out. Each of us and all that we interact with are systems. Our thoughts are systems. Everything we perceive is a system. So everything is a system. Okay, now that's a very powerful statement. So world is made out of systems. And he's saying even thoughts. So even our, what is inside our heads are systems. Okay, so it's a very profound idea. It is both applies to what he will call physical and metaphysical. Okay. Second, systems have shapes and are distinct from their surroundings. Now, this is a classic example. This is again a very profound idea of Bucky. I've been playing with all these shapes, just lots and lots of shapes. Like this one, for example. So all of it is a result of Bucky's ideas of saying, think of the shapes. And when you think of a shape, right, and they are distinct from its surroundings. So, and that actually relates to the next one. All systems have an inside and an outside. Okay, so any system like this one, this is the minimum system. There is something that is inside the system. There is something which is outside the system, and there is the skin of the system itself. Okay, so you can look at it more clearly here, where you can see that there is inside of this, and there is the outside of it, and there is the surface, that is the skin of the system. This may seem like a very simple point, but it is a very profound point. You can look at it in biology, you can look at cell. That cell has a certain nature. So, and it is the boundary of the cell boundary, which is crucial to maintaining its identity. And then there is stuff that flows from inside to outside and outside to inside. But it has a specific shape, specific place, specific identity, which is shown by how it is separated from its surrounding. The connections between nodes are relations. Now, this is something which is very fascinating, because all systems, like all geometric systems like tetrahedrons, you can look at it from three different aspects. You can look at them as 4 nodes, 1, 2, 3, 4. You can look at it as connections, edges, or relations, or flows between. There are 6 of them, between this and this, 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 and this and this. So these are 6 different flows that are happening. The connections between nodes are known as relations and are what hold the system together. You see, when you actually make this, you can find out, like if you make a cube, it is kind of wobbly, but because there is this back and forth relation between these 3 sides of a triangle, it holds it together. And that's on the 2-dimension. In the 3-dimensional space, it is the 4th one. When you add, it becomes a stable shape like this. It is the connections between this that make it possible. A relation may be a flow, a force, or a field. Okay. The next point is systems are not closed. Okay, they are not closed. So I said there were 3 ways. One is the vertex, second is the edge, and third is the faces. The faces will tell you what the limits of the systems are. You see, these faces actually are the skin of the system, which separate it from, which distinguish it from its surroundings. The systems are not closed at their boundaries. Every node is linked to its surroundings. This is not closed system. It interacts with everything. You know, even this, you can see that there is an interaction between the air and all of this. A cell is not by itself, it's in contact with other cells. If it's a single cell organism, it's in contact with water. And you cannot understand a system without its context, the context in which it exists. All system corners are leaky. They either have extra energy or need energy. So that's the flow between them. Systems exhibit synergy. That's a very deep idea. So these were the points that were made on the BFI website. I want to just go through quickly the points that were made in the graphics here. So they have shape. We've talked about that. They're distinct from the universe. So this is something that is distinct from everything else. You are a system. You can look at yourself, your body as a system, and your skin as the boundary. There is inside and there is outside. It is more than its parts. You cannot really understand me by understanding a nail and then adding another nail and saying, oh, okay, how is this person made up? There is a wholeness to systems. There is synergy. Everything is a system. Tetrahedron is a minimum system. They are multi-scale and multi-frequency. The idea of tuning that Joe was talking about is that there's a lot going on in the world. The systems are very, very complex. There's a lot going on inside me. There's a lot going on between us. There is a lot of things going on in the physical world that I'm in. And you, by focusing on or tuning in to one particular aspect, like, for example, just the speech that is coming out from my mouth, which is the sound, which is like there is a boundary here and there is something that is coming out, which is going through the microphone over here into, through all these internet connections to your computer. And from that surface of your computer, you're seeing things. So there is, you can think about anything that way, any system that way. So it's a very profound concept. All right. So if nobody has anything to add, we can go to the next concept of Bucky, which is actually related to this one. And that is going to be the systems change. So let me go ahead and bring that up. Let me share the screen again. Screen, start broadcast. There. Okay. Okay, system change. Don't know how to pronounce this. Precession, trim tab, systems coupling, creating a new model is common rules, social innovation, and co-op. So these concepts by themselves, I don't think we can understand. So let's use the resource of BFI here, and let's go to their section on systems change. They do have a section on systems change. So let's see what it is. It is about trim tabs, system integration, creating new models, and design. Okay, so please keep track of all the thoughts that you have. Would love your thoughts on each of these. Some of these are profound ideas. Systems change. Again, the thing that sets him apart is that he's looking at dynamic systems, not just static systems. Too many of us look at things statically. He's looking at things dynamically, saying there are static systems and there are dynamic systems. Systems change. Bucky Fuller's insight on systems and change can enable us to be more effective. For example, his ideas about trim tabs have enabled many change makers to adjust system direction. This work is rooted in his concept of living green, how might we create success for all? We can use generalized principles and design science to create more effective physical artifacts. And we can also improve how systems operate. Fuller emphasized that everything is a system and all systems are coupled to other systems. How can we use the principles of systems to build better artifacts and a better world? To begin, we need to recall the properties of systems. Systems are composed of relations. The relations determine how the system responds and behaves. To change a system, we need to modify its relations. Some of the relations are external, the interconnections between systems. We often sense systems by their behavior. They resist changes or maintain a goal. With those in mind, we can explore how to change systems and their interaction. To adjust the goal or direction of an existing system, we can use a trim tab, a rudder on the rudder. So this is a really profound idea of a trim tab. In other cases, we need to change how systems interact to achieve our goals. Sometimes a system can't be adjusted and a new model should be created to replace its functions. Don't fight the existing system, create a new model. That's a quote from him. Trim tab. A trim tab is a small rudder on the bigger rudder of a ship or an airplane. Huge rudder is very difficult to move. However, when the trim tab is moved, the rudder follows along. This allows a small amount of force to adjust a much larger system. When the best approach is to adjust the behavior, just a second. Okay, the trim tab metaphor is very powerful as we can see how an individual can affect a larger system such as an organization. Regenerative and sustainable designers are using trim tabs when they teach others and also when they design ways for users to adjust system operations. When the best approach is to adjust the behavior of an existing system, we can use a trim tab. One way to be a trim tab is to influence other people. If we can't change the course of Queen Mary by ourselves, then we can influence the pilot, the navigator, and the ones who set the destinations. This is the way Bucky worked. By giving us better models, we all become trim tabs. Trim tabs can also be seen in stories that connect us and others into a larger whole. These stories connect both the storyteller and the listener to universal truths. Trim tab can also be seen as a valve adjusting flows and relations. Donella Meadows' suggestions in places to intervene in a system can be seen as trim tabs. Call me trim tab is on Bucky's gravestone. Okay, so now we've got two more sections, system interactions, and then we've got creating a new model, and we've got design. Okay, let me pause here and see any comments people have about changes in systems. Go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you'd like to comment on Bucky's approach to systems change. And what I'm thinking of doing is to just stop here as far as looking at the core ideas. We would have covered system and systems change. And then we will go to our main topic of ephemeralization. But if anybody wants to talk about systems change, you're welcome to do that. Go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you'd like to share your thoughts about how Bucky looks at systems change. We'll start with Joe. Joe, go ahead.
I'll be brief. I mean, I think he says it in his quote and he captures it really well, where he says he's just making the previous system obsolete. And essentially, by making it's kind of almost, it's similar, and I hate to equate it to this because I know that Bucky may not look at it this way, but it's almost like the way Silicon Valley looks at the idea of breaking things.
Mm-hmm.
And so as they're starting at like something that's completely revolutionary on how they're actually going to approach a problem, whether it be housing, or whether it be the Dymaxion car. So it's actually just trying these new things, and this is how change actually occurs, because in that process that you're discovering new things. He's starting out with the ideal state as well. So that's another important. So he started out with like the Desiderata.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be very similar in that way to the design way. And so that's, I think that this is, there's a lot more to it, especially when you get into the synergetics aspects of it. But at a very high level, that's what, when I think of systems change, it's just really creating a new model.
Wonderful. Let me do one thing before I go to let me go ahead and go with any comments that everybody has, and then we will go back. I want to read out few more pieces from the BFI website. But first, Rupali, followed by Becky, and then we will take questions and comments. Rupali, go ahead.
Right, thank you. I don't know if Joe stole what I was going to say, but here's what I wanted to say. I really like the sentence where he says, if you don't fight the system, create a new one. I mean, that's such a profound sentence on so many levels. I think that, it begs us all to kind of look at systems and say, what do we need to change here? And what do we need to create? It also is an invitation to create something new instead of complaining about things that are not working or forms that are no longer serving the purpose for what they were designed. And so you have to create a new thing and not complain and not fight. So that's all I have to say about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rupali. Next up is going to be Becky. Becky, go ahead.
Okay. I think that one of the important parts that he talks about is like, when do you design and when do you try to make changes to the system, and instead of just jumping straight to design for the answer for everything, because it's not always the answer to everything. It's only up to a certain point, and it's like, do you throw everything out just because something isn't necessarily working? What's the criteria to actually design? And so you have to take these smaller steps first, as he mentioned. Maybe try to influence the relations, see what you can do in terms of modifying things here and there. Maybe it's the environment, and not necessarily the content. But it's only when things have evolved so much that the effort to keep up with the change doesn't make any sense. That it's like what he's saying is, don't fight. It's like, that requires a lot. You don't just jump into to fight. It has to escalate to that. So design isn't always the solution to everything, but to a certain point, it makes sense to design and not to keep trying to fix the problem. But But then there's also going back to him talking about the changes and describing the trim tab. It's kind of what I had mentioned earlier about cybernetics and like the art of steering and changing the course. So thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. So folks, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to read rest of it, because both what Rupali talked about and what Becky talked about is in there, and then we'll go to Joe, and then we'll go to Ravi. Okay, and if anybody else wants to speak, you're welcome to do that. But I want to read these following things so that because I think this is very, very apropos here. Just a second here. Okay, systems interaction. A second approach. So the first approach was the trim tab approach, where you are trying to take the system and you're trying to look at the point of maximum leverage and come up with a way of actually putting your hand on that lever that is going to produce this maximum leverage and change the course. A second approach is to work on systems interaction. An example of interaction is pollination. When the bee contacts the flower to get sustenance, it picks up pollen. You might say that this action is unintentional, as the bee did not intend to do this. But when bee contacts another flower, some pollen is transferred and that flower gets pollinated. This is a very common strategy and an example of species evolving together or co-evolving. As more flowers are pollinated, more plants grow, and there is more food for the pollinators. Nature does this everywhere and is a significant part of systems resilience. We can think about symbiosis and other biological phenomena as systems interaction. Bucky emphasized that actions and their reactions don't cancel out. There is always some extra left over or needed to balance the interaction. This extra is the cause of systems interactions and can be used to our benefit. Universe can be seen as a multitude of events, and every event is a combination of action, reaction, and resultant. I'm going to skip this. In other words, the major effect of systems on one another is how they couple together. Side effects are the major effects. He often described this as precession. We find that precession is completely regenerative. One brings out the other. So I gave you the dropping of the stone in the water. So that's the example that we read earlier. For example, waste products of livestock can be used as fertilizer to improve the soil. Organizations working together can both gain. Now, this is the point that Rupali was making. In other cases, current systems can't be adjusted to accomplish what is needed, and a new system should be designed. Don't fight the existing system, create a new model, was another of Bucky's saying. If the available housing is bad for people and the planet, create an alternative housing system. This could be something that anyone can build, like a dome or a yurt. Bucky extended this idea to a housing industry that created self-sufficient, efficient, healthy, recyclable housing. After he created a bathroom which was independent of plumbing, he also created a company to sell them. His work is full of new models, the dome, car, and map, were new ways to solve existing challenges. Today, there are many new models in the area of local food, community-supported agriculture, organizations to support farmers, the regenerative agriculture are all examples. When resources are scarce, a new way to share may be the answer. In each case, the new model is a way for people to get together and exchange in fair and equitable manner. All right. Fair trade, common rules, microcredit, universal basic income, open source, wikis, and sharing economy are all new models that empower individuals, and each is enabled by a new network. Design. Design is the last tool we will discuss. As Bucky described it, design is the intentional arrangement of energy, material, or information to form a stable structure. This structure might only last a short time, though. We design using generalized principles to make sure that our efforts are in line with universal forces and are efficient. That's a lot of stuff. The good news is that everything is sensible, practical, and can be practiced by anyone. Again, this is from the Buckminster Fuller Institute, and I thank them that they have produced this amazing resource that we can ramp up on learning about Bucky. So you can see on systems change, we talked about the trim tab, which is trying to find the points of maximum leverage to modify existing systems. We talked about the approach of understanding systems interaction as a way of changing systems. We looked at creation of new models, and we looked at design as 4 different ways of doing this. All right, now we'll go to Joe, followed by Ravi. Joe.
Yeah, actually, you know what? You captured everything that I was going to say. Is essentially
Not me, this was Buckminster Fuller Institute.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, I was going to go to the idea of trim tab and leverage was the most important thing as far as making change. I'll just also comment that what Becky said was actually really very important, is that sometimes it's just a little change that needs to take place in order to the existing system, as opposed to just upending the system itself. And trim tab is kind of an example of that. So that was my major comment that I had anyway. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right. So what we're going to do is that now it's open. I want people to be able to comment, make any, because see, what I was trying to do was to make sure that we put Bucky's ideas about system and system change on the table. Okay. So that we know, because that's the whole purpose of this entire series, try to understand Bucky's ideas. But now I'm open to any comments, any questions. We're going to start with Ravi, followed by Maritza. Ravi, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Shrikant. Becky and Joe, it's a lot to follow, of course, because in addition to just mapping out Bucky's contribution to design, and what I've really found interesting is architecture and interior design and how that maps out to our everyday life. How do we apply the things that we look at from a day-to-day basis? And just simplifying what I'm trying to say is that, we have a very limited viewpoint of ecology as a gradual subject that I think can be a really great topic to really dive into as a way how we integrate with nature and the aspects of what Bucky tried to integrate with geometric and natural design into architecture, everyday living, and the perspectives of just like, hey, these are just mathematical concepts that we integrate with our day-to-day lives. I just think it's a really fascinating topic. And I love that they are 52 living ideas, because we have to live these concepts and really reflect on them every single day. So I just want to open that concept up to just say, hey, these are from Bucky's perspective, these are living ideas. These are perspectives that you see in your everyday life. So happy to pass that
Thank you. Thank you, Ravi. Really appreciate it and glad to have you here. Next up is Maritza.
I'm super excited to go after that statement. Thank you, Ravi. So I was going to also bring up to you guys that, sometimes it's really easy when we talk about systems to just get it stuck in your head that we're talking about, these very stale processes. But I am convinced from what little I've gleaned of Bucky so far is that he did not see systems that way. He tells us, it's interesting. He talks about systems even when he's talking about himself, when he's telling his story in the critical path, when he's talking about his self-disciplines, he tells us that that he talks about change, and the way he says it, he says, by and large, I seem to have made more mistakes than any others of whom I know. But I have learned thereby to make ever swifter acknowledgement of the errors, and thereafter immediately set about to deal more effectively with the truths disclosed by the acknowledgement of erroneous assumptions. And I think that's a really, really fancy way of saying that we as living human beings must acknowledge and be consciously aware of our errors, our mistakes, our missteps, because the pivoting, the acknowledgement allows us to pivot. And pivoting is the beginning of any effective change we're going to do. In a different one of his books, he also reminds us that each experience begins and ends. And if we remember that, it allows us to realize both metaphysically and physically that if you look at things as time increments, then there's always going to be alternates that you can look into. And so I think that ultimately in all these, it's the idea of system change is that we should arm ourselves with the processes of change and knowing, about these different paths, arm ourselves with them so that we can incorporate them as we go about and interact with all these other souls, some of whom are being intentional and some who are not. So I think that it's just really incredible if you take a moment and consider something so, at a glance, so heavy and deeply it's very, very almost stale if you don't think about it too hard. If you take a moment and look at how you can apply that to everything, because I believe that's something that Bucky did. And if you look at other of his writings that are not specifically about systems, I think you'll see that. And it's okay. As we walk along together, I'm going to keep pointing it out to you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Maritza. So I just want to make one comment and then we will go to the second point, second part of this meetup, which is going to be on ephemeralization. So again, I want to thank Curt McNamara for producing this amazing graphic. Please note that it is in the chat, the image of that, so you can download it and look at it and use it as a base for exploring Bucky's ideas. We've covered only 2 of the 5 today. We covered systems and systems change, and we covered it in a very superficial way. Okay, there is a lot of depth to each of these points, each of these subpoints. The things that we did not cover were power of design, power of the individual, and shape of nature. And folks, we will be going through all of this. We will figure out a way. We'll actually, probably one of the times we will go through rest of these. I'm going to invite Curt to present on this. He's the guy who has put this together, I think in association with the Trim Tab book group. So I would love for him to present all these ideas together as an introduction on one of these days. So I will work on that. But ourselves also, we will go through that. I mean, the thing is, I mean, this is just my way of approaching things. It's somebody like Bucky is very difficult to grasp. And there is just so much to grasp. And what you want to do is that you want to actually grasp his ideas, not just say that you have something, but you actually want to say, where is he coming from? And it requires a lot of work. But these kind of tools help us kind of get maybe a little bit of jump forward. They will actually place before us a buffet of ideas. Which ones do we want to go through first? And all of us will find ways which are going to be more effective for us. So please, read. Again, I strongly recommend Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth. That's my favorite Bucky book. It's short and it captures really core of Bucky's ideas really, really well. It's far more accessible than books like Synergetics. I'm still trying to get into those level of books. So, all right. So with that, I'm going to hand the presentation over to Maritza. I will still do the